Hey guys, it's Multiplier here. So today I'm going to show you how I made this. Pretty cool, right? It's kind of alien-y, kind of squelchy, it's kind of bassy, but got a lot of character and it's just different and nice sounding. So yeah, I'm going to kind of show you how I made it because I've kind of made it in the process of working on this new electro thing I'm working on. So I thought ideal time to kind of break it down and show you step by step how I kind of approached it and how the sound kind of evolved. Just because it's a different way to kind of approaching kind of making sounds and making bass sounds and noises. Normally people kind of start with a synth and then kind of do a lot of modulation and then process it a lot. But I find it's a lot quicker to do kind of sample based stuff if you want the really interesting noises. So yeah, I'll kind of show you how it works. Cool. So let's start off right at the beginning. So we're going to start off with stage 1 because 1's the smallest number. Right, so what we basically want to do is we want some sort of audio clip, some sort of sample that we're then going to process. So you got to kind of think about what an interesting sound is and what makes an interesting sound. So fundamentally, it's when you've got a lot of kind of detail, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of it subtle, a lot of it not so subtle. But fundamentally, there's got to be a lot of stuff happening, whether it's kind of side to side stuff, pitch stuff, kind of different character, different kind of all sorts, just madness happening, like lots of change, lots of all sorts of stuff. Pretty good description, but that's kind of the idea. You want a lot of stuff going on. So instead of having to program all those modulations in and programming all that complicatedness, if you start off with a complicated thing in the first place, then all you have to do is kind of process it a bit, chop it up, and then kind of fine tune it, and you're sorted. It's a lot quicker that way. So I got this kind of vocoded vocal sample.
Come fly with me, come fly with me, come fly with me, come fly with me.
And because of the fact I've had a play about before, I know for a fact that these kind of vocoded vocal samples do work pretty well using this technique. Partly because it's got that kind of human element. So in the final result, even though it's heavily processed, a little bit of that kind of human element shines through subtly. So kind of that hits the kind of human bits in your brain that says this is an interesting thing to remember. That's why pop songs all have vocals in. It's because people connect with human sound. So you can kind of start with the human sound and process it. People will connect with that sound a lot more. And then also the fact it's vocoded not only just gives it a bit of cool kind of alien-y character, but I know for a fact that if you kind of stretch it out or pitch it down, you can make cool bass noises out of it. So it's just something I've kind of discovered by having to play about with, but you can pretty much start with any sample you want and make it cool one way or another. So start with vocoded vocals if you want somewhere to begin, but yeah, choose anything really once you've kind of got the idea of it. Cool, so we've got that kind of vocoded sample. Then what we're going to do is basically I either kind of stretch it out or I kind of warp it, so kind of not necessarily stretch it out but stretch it in, move it about a bit, but then transpose it down with this transpose knob. So transpose is basically just bringing the pitch down, and I know for a fact it works pretty well, at least with these vocoded samples. So I had a bit of a play about, literally just a minute or two, and came up with this. So you see, it's already got a little bit more bass character to it. It's just a bit deeper, a bit more interesting. One thing to kind of bear in mind whenever you're kind of going to make a bass sound, you're going to want something happening in the bass frequencies. That sounds obvious, but it's a lot easier to kind of have the initial sample providing some of the bass than it is to then add in some of the bass with the processing afterwards. Now you can do it kind of in retrospect by kind of adding in the bass with processing, but it's a lot easier to have the bass in there initially. So if we go to kind of the spectrum analyzer and play this sample through, we can have a look and we'll see there is something going on with the bass frequency. So we're looking at anything from about 50 hertz to 150, 200 hertz. So we see in this particular case, we've got stuff going on around 136 hertz, which is fine. It's pretty high up there for bass, but it's perfectly fine for what I particularly want in this track, because in this particular track, I wanted the kind of the kick drum itself to fill up most of the low end because it's quite kind of like a long, interesting kick. So this kind of like higher bass kind of fills up the higher bit, so it kind of fits together nicely. So it depends on the track, depends on what you want to do, but it's just something to kind of to bear in mind. Cool. So yeah, the next stage is to basically, once you've got kind of a more interesting sample, I'm calling it sample even though it's not in a sampler because it is a sample, is to basically come up with some sort of pattern, some sort of riff, some sort of arrangement that makes it kind of musical. It's kind of like a melody type thing, but you can call it a riff because there's more of a riff than a melody. So yeah, I came out with this, for example. Which is quite cool because I was making a kind of an electro track. So you can imagine with like a big 4 on the floor kick and some simple kind of spaced out percussion. Be quite a cool track. So yeah, just come up with a cool riff. Or if you're just coming up with single noises, do that. Do whatever you want really, but in my particular case, I wanted a riff. And yeah, for example, in this last little beat, I actually reversed the sample. So it's in reverse, just this with this reverse button. I'll just reverse it back. So now it's normal, and then I just clicked reverse. Sorted. So you can reverse the samples. You can do whatever you want, but have a real big play about with kind of this bit of audio. Kind of just treat it as something cool to fuck about with, really. So yeah, now we have that basic riff going on. We need to do some processing. So whenever you're making any kind of bass noises, or if you're me in general, you're going to want to do some kind of distortion. So what I use for distortion is iZotope Trash 2. Just because it's super awesome, super amazing, does pretty much everything all in one, especially if you're not feeling very creative. You can literally just kind of cycle through the presets because there's hundreds of them until something cool jumps out at you, and then you can kind of tweak the presets from there. So that's exactly what I did in this particular case. I cycled through the presets, found something cool, tweaked it a bit, and then I kind of ended up with this. So. It's pretty cool, right? So yeah, iZotope Trash 2, just in case you don't have it. Basically, all it's doing is it's got a filter, so you can see just got this basic filter curve type shape thing. So again, you don't actually need Trash 2 to do that. And then it's got this trash section, which is basically the distortion part. So you don't need Trash 2. Even the built-in saturator plugin is pretty good in Ableton Live. So what, just like how we've got 2 stages in Trash 2, like 2 stages of distortion, what I did in some of my tracks before I had Trash 2, I just used the Ableton Live's built-in saturator. So audio effects, oh, I got a text message. Audio effects down to saturator. That's basically a distortion plugin, really kind of underrated. It's a really good effect that not enough people really use because they think it's built in and it's not very good. But that's basically how I made a lot of my older really crazy noises before I had Trash 2. So just stack a few of those saturators on top of each other, really play about with stuff, even if you don't quite know what it's doing, have a bit of an experiment. And then that's how you can get your distortion part. And then after that, you've got a convolve, which is basically just a reverb type thing, except it's kind of short decay time reverb, so it's more like small room body type, speaker box cabinet type, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of, instead of having those long reverb tails, it's more of a kind of, it's more to give it kind of a space of its own, just make it more real sounding, even though it's a synthetic sound, just kind of gives it a bit of realness. So that's just basically reverb one way or another. So have a play about with some reverb, and then dynamics, it's just compressor. So even though I've used that iZotope Trash 2, which I'm guessing the average person watching this won't have, you don't really need it. It's just the simple idea of process it how you want. Maybe do some filtering, definitely do some distortion one way or another, whether it's subtle or not so subtle. Convolve, bit of reverb. You always want a bit of reverb, even if it's subtle. Just that kind of gives it a space, gives it kind of realness. And then dynamics is just compressors and gates and stuff, which you might need, you might not. It depends kind of how your sound has come out of your distortion. So it's pretty cool. I happen to really love that plugin. You don't need it. What did I do after that? Oh yeah, one final step is after I did that, because the reverb that's built into Trash 2 is kind of a short reverb, which gives it kind of a space. Doesn't give it much of a tail. In fact, it's basically no tail. So because of the nature of the track, I wanted to give it kind of a long reverby tail that kind of had a lot of high end, just to make it more interesting, kind of fill in those gaps and make it sound a little bit more epic and stuff. So this is before the kind of final bit of reverb. And then with the kind of bright long verb preset in Ableton Live, which is one of my favorite reverb presets in Live. It sounds like this. Pretty sweet, right? Just gives it a bit of that kind of twinkle, a bit of that kind of shine. Highly recommend bright long verb if you're kind of not sure which presets to start off having to play about with. Just kind of gives it a lot of sizzly kind of high end stuff. It's really cool. So I think the presets built in, like the reverb here, just click that button, you can see all these different presets, special, room, hall, tons of good presets. I only really use the reverbs either built into Ableton Live, or if I want the kind of the really short ones, I use the ones in Trash 2. But yeah, don't overlook the reverbs built into Live, especially for the long tails. They're really good. Most people kind of dismiss them as being built in, so not very good, but yeah, you can come up with some cool shit. So yeah, it's kind of been reasonably long, but that is how the sound came about. Best thing to do is, now that you've kind of seen this approach to making noises, is to kind of have a play about with it yourself. I came out of this way of making shit, and I discovered that you could use vocoded samples to come up with really cool alien sounding bass noises simply from experimenting. So don't be afraid of experimenting, and don't be afraid of trying stuff even if you don't quite know what it's doing, because the pros do that. The best people in the world don't necessarily know what a certain type of distortion shape is going to change the sound. They just literally cycle through presets a lot, like deadmau5, Vinci, everyone. They just every now and then they'll just kind of cycle through presets to kind of see what sounds cool, because you don't have to program every little patch for every little bit of thing every time. It's just a waste of your time. So cycle through presets, don't be afraid of doing it. And yeah, that's pretty much it really. So I guess the one final thing is, before it would go into a track, what I will probably do in this particular case is I'll print the reverb, like the final this bright long verb, that kind of twinkly sheen, that kind of long tail reverb. I'll render that out, print it out, call it what you want, basically convert that reverb to audio. So I've got the reverb in its own kind of audio track. And that way I'll be able to kind of control the tail, process it a bit if need be, and just basically control it in a lot more interesting way, because there's a lot of cool things you can do once you print out your reverb. So every now and then you can filter it all the way out and then bring it back in, and it's kind of, because it's in the background and it's subtle, it's just a really nice thing to do to be able to control that. So yeah, that's the one thing that I haven't really done yet, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, I've been multiplier. This track won't be out for ages because it's not even half done yet. But yeah, cool. Check me out. Links and shit below. Hit me up. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever really, if you want any tutorials doing. That's what I'm here for. Sweet. Have fun.